Can get started. So I want to welcome everyone to this workshop. Hi, my name is Joel, and I am co-founder and chief architect of PractiTest. I'm also program chair of the online test conf, and we are getting started with day 2 with this pre-session for day 2, where we're going to be doing, I guess, a little bit more in-depth kind of session. That's why we're calling them a workshop, a little bit more extended also than our regular sessions. And so welcome and thanks for joining. Let's start with a little bit of an intro. Wait, I need to make sure that my technical stuff is working. There we go. So a little bit of an intro about me. I guess important. So first of all, I'm Joel, born in Costa Rica, currently living in Israel, and I work in a company called PractiTest because we're testers, and these things are important, a little bit of numbers. So I have one wife, 3 kids, a number of pets, 2 of them actually here next to me. I'm doing the session from home, as you can see from the guitars on the back. And I've been a tester for my whole professional life. You might even say that a little bit before my professional life got started, I became a tester by accident by joining a startup company while I was in college. And I just loved it and stayed for the ride. And it has been a great ride ever since. I've done, I guess, almost everything around testing, from being a junior tester, senior tester, QA manager, director, consultant, whatever you want. I'm actually being there. And today I work for a pretty cool company called PractiTest. I will introduce it in a couple seconds. And around testing, and in a sense around practice, I also have a number of interesting, let's say, projects, one of them being the online test conf that we have in here. And the other one being the state of testing survey and report that we're actually running today. And I will share with you maybe a link to it later on, because it's pretty good if you can actually start filling that survey on. And a number of other stuff, like my podcast with Rob, that was the guy doing the last workshop yesterday. In any case, a number of pretty interesting projects in there. Just a couple words about PractiTest. Both are sponsors of the company that I work in. This is a pretty cool test management solution that we have, and the idea is to not only manage your testing like you can do with most of other systems in there, but we're looking at it from a tester's perspective. And if you listen to the session that Paul Gerard gave yesterday, even the one that Maret was giving, and everyone basically talking about how the challenges of testing are shifting today. We are pretty much on that. And we understand that testing is becoming a lot more specialized, and we need to integrate with a lot of things. And I think that the job of a QA management system today, a test management system, is more kind of being the hub of information for everything that is going on. Being that your manual testing, your user stories in Jira or any other place, the automation that is running everywhere, in Jenkins, in Selenium, anywhere you want. Everything needs to fit together into one big mishmash, if you want. And we need to take that mishmash and turn it into information. So that's what we're doing in PractiTest, and you don't need to take my word for it. We have quite a lot of happy customers. And again, last plug that I'm going to do, you can just go to our website, www.practice.com, and start a 2-week evaluation. Don't take my word for it. You can basically just work with the system. But enough of plugs, and going back to testing, what I want to do right now is to take you over a number of simple techniques, relatively simple techniques, that will help you improve your testing and obviously the testing of your team. And I think that it's important to have these kind of sessions once in a while, because we're pretty busy with our day-to-day. We're pretty busy with the fact that, oh, we just got another user story that we're not thinking about, or, oh gosh, we just found a critical bug in production, and we need to start thinking, why did we release it, or how come it happened, and how can we improve it? And someone is sick, or working from home, meaning, yeah, cool, so I have guitars and balloons, but I still have 3 kids here doing a lot of noise. So there's too many things happening around us. And unfortunately, we don't have time to stop evaluate what we're doing and improve everything that we're doing right there. So I want to bring you some simple techniques, and hopefully you will be able to implement some of them, maybe write some of them on the side and try to think about them later. But just to give you some feedback or some things that are coming from our experience, my experience in practice, my experience working with a number of customers on how can we just improve testing as a whole. So without further ado, let's make sure that we're a little bit aligned on what's going on, because obviously a technique on testing will be measured or will be shifted depending on how do we work, okay? So I think that one of the things that I want to emphasize here, and I'm coming from, as I mentioned, an environment where I understand that the world is shifting towards a more DevOps perspective. And one of the things that we're seeing all the time when we work on DevOps or SaaS environments, or it doesn't really matter how you call it, but most of us are in a place where we're working on software and we're being asked to release extremely quickly, okay? And I remember that first transition, even to Agile, meaning working on waterfall projects where we used to have months and months and months of testing, and all of a sudden they're telling us, oh, by the way, your whole life cycle was just shrunk into a 2-week cycle or 3-week cycle. It was like, well, it's very nice that you want to tell us that pretty little story, but it doesn't fit our reality where our testing cycle itself takes about 2 months. So how can I shrink 2 months into 3 weeks? But it happened. Meaning we were able to make those adjustments, and obviously we tested less, and obviously we tested more accurately. But we did shrink in those 3 weeks, and then someone comes along and says, "Oh, by the way, you're doing continuous development and continuous deployment. So as soon as the user story is ready, you need to set it out and to place it into the world." And we were like, "Oh, you're telling me that now even those 2 weeks are not enough? We need to do it in 3 days?" And yes, that is basically what I'm telling you. So what is happening is that the perception is that testing is shrinking because, again, schematically speaking, we were working, I don't care if we're talking here about Agile, where we should have at least 1 week or 10 days to do something, or Waterfall, where we had months about it. And they're telling us, okay, so let's assume for a second that your testing coverage is going to be divided somehow between manual testing and script automation testing, okay? And it can be 50-50, it can be 80-20, to whatever side you want to go into it. But they're telling us, okay, so you have X amount of time, and because we're working Agile or DevOps or continuous delivery, now it's going to look like this. And this is the amount of time you have, and go ahead and divide it as good as you want. And even if you take, like a lot of people in theory said, oh, so you're going to do a lot more automation, you still are shrunk in time. So how can you do it? What I'm here to tell you is that this is not the reality of what's happening. Because in practice, what is happening is that everything that we're not testing before release, either manually or automatically, it's being tested in production. It's being tested as part of that monitoring that is happening outside. And it's being tested in the sense that if there's anything in there that needs to be fixed, we're going to find it, because someone is going to run into it, and we are going to be able to know it and then fix it. Or if the functionality is not good enough, you might not have a single bug, but you know what, usability is lacking or features are lacking, we are going to be able, if we want to, understand what is going on. So I would like to reframe our testing framework not into only what is happening, what used to happen before release, that used to be, comparatively speaking, a lot. Now it became, comparatively speaking, less. This is not the only testing that we're doing. We're also doing these big amount of testing in here. How does it happen? Well, simple. We've all seen this schematic before. Okay, this is the quote unquote DevOps process. And the DevOps process, what it says is, okay, so we're going to start at a point, it doesn't really matter, it's a continuous process, but okay, so we have, let's say, a user story, we're going to plan it here, then it's going to be coded, built in somewhere or another, and then we'll go over some testing. Once that is done, because we are a DevOps firm, we're going to be releasing our own stuff. So we go ahead and release that feature into production. We're going to deploy it into production. Now it's going to be operated and monitored. What I'm here to tell you is that this is right, but it's wrong, because it's not true that testing is something that happens only here after planning, coding, and building. If you think about it, testing is something that has to happen throughout that whole process. And what we might have there, it's not so much testing as, you know what? So before we release it, we have a kind of a sanity procedure that we want to make sure that everything at least looks okay. But we have been doing testing in planning, coding, building. We'll talk about that. And something similar happens in production that once you think about it, it's pretty obvious where, oh, monitoring is not something that happens after we operate. Actually, we're monitoring the whole process. We're monitoring the release and the deployment. Obviously, we're monitoring throughout the operations. And what might happen is that when you're wrapping things up and trying to reach conclusions before you start replanning, then you have, let's say, a focused analysis process. And even here, you might have that analysis before. So I want to reframe these DevOps process saying, no, it's not that we have testing here at the bottom and monitoring here at the bottom. No, we have testing throughout the whole pre-release process if you want. And we have either testing in production, or if you want to call the child by name, call it monitoring, that happens once we are in the more production operating environment. Okay, so just trying to put these as a frame of reference here. And by the way, I'm going to be looking. I want to say something else. This is screen A, where I have my camera. Obviously, I'm looking at you. Hi. And this is also where I have my presentation, but I have here another screen. So I'm going to be looking here all the time because I have here my Slack and the Q&A and stuff like that. So if you want to ask questions, you can go over the chat. I actually see someone here in the chat. And yes, Darcy, I brought the balloons from the office home because it would have been a shame here. So if you want to ask something, questions, or put stuff like that, then just go ahead and put it here or in the Slack channels. Okay, and I see that there's a Slack question here. Okay, there's someone here. Oh, thanks. People are saying that they were not able to log into the workshop. So no, I just help them place the link in there. In any case, so this is how I want to reframe our testing operations. And now let's go into business. I think that it was, who was it? Mike yesterday said that whenever he's doing something, he would basically use a mind map and use it for testing, use it for a lot of things. This is a mind map. I need to say it's an old mind map. I need to update this one about my simple techniques for testing in production. My new one actually has a little bit of a shift branches, so I will update the presentation before I share it with everyone. So it has the new map. But basically what I'm doing here, it's how do I try to organize my mind in order to define what operations I want to do and how do I structure my process. So I want to go over these main branches with you and talk about, give you some examples of the different type of techniques that I suggest you could start using. And all of these techniques are things that either we're using in practice today as part of the tested operations, or that I have been able to see based on everything that we're doing with our customers and again, the people that I visit quite often. So just to do a short stop here, I see that some people are entering the workshop. So hi everyone, Joel here. I just introduced the topic, so we haven't gone into stuff very much into it, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, either Slack channel that I see some of you are already using, please use the correct channel. It should be D2WRK Joel, that's the workshop, because they have another session later today. Or you can just use the chatting. So let's start talking about what they're going to be doing. And I try to organize them based on let's say, process or stages. And I'm going to be covering a number of them. The first one that, in my experience, is extremely important is everything related to user stories and features. Not because what they used to tell us that if you catch a bug before it's been developed, then it's a lot cheaper to whatever find and fill than solve it, whatever you have in there. No, it's because actually user stories is a place where there are a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors. And if you catch them, it will just save you a lot of additional time spent in stuff. So I'm going to be talking about that. Then we're going to be talking a little bit about how should you prepare for your testing, the overall process of testing and things that you can improve in there, the actual testing operations, and then just a little bit of a taste of the kind of things that we can do in deployment and operations in order to improve our process. So let's actually go into this. The first area, it's user story validation. And it's incredible how much we can gain from doing this. And just to give you some examples, user stories or requirements are extremely risky synchronization points. And this is something that I see all the time. It's incredible. Meaning, I might be thinking about a feature and I might be writing about it, and I will capture some of those ideas on a user story. In my case, it's going to be in PractiTest. You might do it in Jira. You might be doing it in a Word document. Doesn't matter. But I'm just going to be writing the parts that I think are interesting, and I'm going to be putting out everything that I think that it's obvious. So I'm not going to say that we should be doing it within a specific module, maybe because for me it's obvious that these functionalities happen in that module. But then this same user story reaches another person, and for them it might be in a separate module, on a different module altogether. And because for me it was obvious, for them it wasn't, then we have a very big synchronization issue in there. Everyone is looking at their world through their glasses, obviously, and these glasses are tainted by my experience, by my likings, by my understanding, meaning anything that I've done, then it's going to be based on that. And so user stories are extremely, extremely, extremely risky. I think that there's a fetch to try to do user stories as lame as we can. Oh, the shorter the better, because we work in Agile, so we shouldn't have documentation, we should have more communication. But no, we're actually, it's taking us to the other side, because, oh, we're assuming that Pete or Jane thinks as I do, and it just goes off the park. And if we don't find it when we're working the user story, we're going to be finding that either when we get the first build to be tested, or even worse, once it's in production and you go into, hey, wait a second, why is it like this? And the developer is going to go, well, it's obvious, isn't it? And you go like, no, it isn't. So it's extremely important to actually do that. Another point that it's important here is the fact that as our applications grow and expand, we will inevitably start running into places where we're adding features into one area of the product that might already exist in another area of the product. And because the product is too big, or we don't have enough experience, when we joined the company after that was in there, we're not even aware of that. So we have competing features or even cannibalizing features within the same product. So we need to make sure that we have a lot more mechanisms that will allow us to go over that and understand how that works. And it's not trivial, but it's not that complex either. Okay, it's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. And there are a number of things that we can do about that. One of the things that I really think that we need to align our companies on is to make sure that, especially if you're working DevOps, especially if you don't have that large release that you're going to be doing, make sure that you're working with an MVP, with a minimal viable product. Okay. Now, it's, first of all, for some people, it's not trivial what's an MVP. An MVP is the minimal amount of functionality that will allow us to show it to a customer, to a user, and make sure that they understand what we want to do, and they tell us, yes, this is what you want in the system or not, and we're going to be getting feedback. The idea is that because we're working DevOps and we can release the feature multiple times all the time. So it's better to start small, get validation, and then fine tune whether we need to go this side or that side with the feature. And more times than not, we start with something, we throw it into the field, and we get feedback that says, yeah, this is what we wanted, but it's not exactly what you were doing. So let's make sure that you have that MVP. Part of what I think we need to do as testers, as quality professionals, is to make sure that we are working on that MVP. Okay, making sure that, is this the bare minimum? Are we working on stuff that we shouldn't be working? Are we wasting our times basically on that? So it's something that we need to make sure that it's there. Once we have an MVP, one of the things that a lot of people miss is that whenever you're releasing, don't care, it might be a small feature or a large feature, the reason that you're releasing this feature is because you think that it will increase the value that your product is having on your customers. Okay, let's say that I have an application to get food delivered home. Okay, everyone's working from home, so we're ordering takeout and delivery, and we have an application on our phones, and we're adding a new feature that allows me to add comments to the order that I have in there. My assumption is that if I add that feature to add comments, people will use it more, people will like my application more, and so I will increase the value and hence the revenue of my system. That's my business hypothesis. I'm saying because I'm going to be adding this thing, I expect my users to use the system more, or at least to use that feature more. So I have that idea. I need to make sure that, first of all, it's clearly defined. What am I supposed to be getting from that so that we can validate our MVP? But once we have that, we need to have the instrumentation for that, because if I'm assuming that people will use that feature, but I have no way of validating if people are using it or not, if I don't have that ability to look into my production data and say, oh, I see an increase in the number of people working with the system after I released the feature, so it has been validated that it's better. Or the opposite, you know what, we understand that since we released the feature, the number of clicks went down. So maybe we're doing something wrong here. Maybe adding the feature made the process more complex, and so people are dropping out of the process. So we need to have that instrumentation there. Problem is that a lot of people think that, again, it's trivial that if we're releasing a new feature, we want to measure it. But then we don't add those measurement criteria, those measurement requirements into the user story, and so people don't add it in there. So we're basically working blind. And it's very important to make sure that when you're writing that user story, when you're reviewing that user story, there is going to be information about that in there. Because if not, it's not going to be done. Meaning, when push comes to shove, we're always late. When push comes to shove, there are always bugs in production. When push comes to shove, we don't have all the time that we thought we had in the beginning. So we're going to start cutting corners, and we start by cutting those corners that no one told us that we need to write. Okay, so instrumentation usually is one of those that suffers first. Let's say that we have all of that in there. There are still some issues intrinsically within the user stories that we need to work. First of all, as a tester, what are the risks that we see in that feature? Why should we be testing that? I like making sure that whenever we have a user story, we start by adding those risks into there, and we usually do it in the user story review, because if you list those risks on the user story, automatically your programmers will start thinking about those. It's like saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to be testing this and this and this and this. So make sure that you test for that as well. So it's basically saying, I'm going to be testing it. Let's say that I have my kids in school. I always tell them, if your teacher is telling you what's going to be in the test, there's no single reason why you shouldn't study that and make sure that you know that part. And those are the questions that you know are going to come from there. So it's not cheating if you know it. Just go ahead, and it would be dumb not to learn that up front. So we're doing basically the same here and there. So it's important. Things that are also important, make sure that we have considerations about deployment and data migration. Again, here, if we know that this user story is going to make me, it's going to force me to have downtime on the system. Okay, so I need to test for that. I need to plan for that. Is it a user story that talks about something that is integrated? In PractiTest, we have a lot of integrations to test management systems, to automation systems. We have to bug trackers. Everyone's using Jira more or less. So, oh, wait a second, is this user story related to Jira integration? Good, so we need to test that up front. Let's make sure that everything's on the table. Nothing should be assumed. And one of the most important parts that I see all the time that we're missing is making sure that we consult with external sources. What do I mean by that? It's incredible how a small company or even a larger company has a lot of information that we're not tapping. We are right now making a expanding functionality in one area of the product. Have we talked with our customer support to check if there are issues on that area of the product? Have we talked with our professional services? Do we know if there are specific customers who might have inputs to tell us what should we be doing? We don't even need that MVP. We have people who will tell us what they want in the system. Are we tapping that information? A lot of times when you're reviewing the user story, you see all sorts of open questions. Oh, we don't really know this, we don't really know that. Many times we do know it, we're just quote unquote lazy. And we don't want to go to those people outside of my initial organization just to get that information. Sometimes it's because of politics, sometimes it's because we don't want to generate the noise. Sometimes we're not even aware we can do it. So it's very important for me when I see a user story to make sure that we are tapping as much of that information as possible, especially if it's internal. There's nothing more motivating for a support engineer or for a customer success engineer or for a customer success manager or a professional service engineer than for the development department to come and say, hey, I know that you've been working on this. I want you to help me define the functionality that is going to come in the system later. They will jump at the opportunity to talk to you, and you will get quite a lot of information in there. Okay, so it's a lot of stuff that we can actually get done just by validating that we have the correct user stories in place. Okay, before we move to testing predictions, testing preparations, any questions up to now? And again, feel free if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask, or type it using either Slack or chat. We have Q&A here, let me check. No, chat or Slack, or we can move forward. Okay, so assuming for a second that our user stories are right, then we can start talking about test preparations. Now, a very big problem that I see around test preparations is that everyone thinks that, sorry, not everyone, obviously not you because you're testing professionals, but when you're talking with someone else, especially if you're doing whole team testing in the system in your team, and so non-professional testers will be doing some of the testing, people don't understand that not all tests are created equal, and not all tests have the same constraints, requirements, needs, history, whatever. And I like to exemplify this by explaining that, oh, look, this is Swiss Army knife. And I think that every geek and a lot of people who just like functionality, they love the Swiss Army knife because it gives me quite a lot of functionality. But even in Swiss Army knives, sometimes we can have something relatively simple like this, or we might need a little bit more tools so we can get something like this, because it's functional to have a little bit more tools, or you might need quite a lot more tools because you are right now going to go on an excursion around the world, and you even need a compass in there and a magnifying glass in there. But the problem is that there's a trade-off, because the more, I don't know if you've experienced this, but as a kid, I loved my Swiss Army knives, and I had a bunch of them. And the more tools you have, the harder it is to open them, and the thicker it gets. So it's a lot less comfortable to work with it. So if you ask me, I would have preferred this one a lot more than this one. But in some occasions, I used to take the one that I had in here. And then one day I realized that, wait a second, you can also have a Victorinox wrench like this, that it's like a Swiss Army knife. But you know what? If I'm going to be working on a camp where we're building stuff instead of just cutting things, then this is a little bit better because of the pliers. But then again, sometimes the only thing that you need is a good knife. So you might want to go for that. Okay, so just as testing is something that will require you to do a lot of operations, meaning when we're testing a user story, we're going into data security, usability. I'm not even talking about functionality yet, okay? And sometimes you will need to run SQL queries. And so you want to have more tools than that. And sometimes you need to go into log analysis. And so you want to have more tools than that. I need to do load testing. Oh, so I need that. But sometimes, even on the same process, I just want to run a deep down exploratory session. And so I want to go very deep into just one aspect of the system. And so when we're preparing for testing, we need to understand that we will need a number of knives. And if not a number of knives, at least to define which knife with which tools we will want to have in there. Because we want to be prepared to have just enough. If you don't have the tools you need, you won't be able to do it. If you have too many tools, you will be having more noise than what you want, and sometimes you just want to concentrate. But we're not talking, oh, wait a second. Let's go over here. There's a question here about, wait, user stories on Slack. I'm just going to stop before I move forwards and go into test preparations. Okay, there's a question here, and it's an interesting one. Let's say that, and I'm going to go back into the user story parts where I'm asking you, and sorry for this stop, but I think it's important. I was talking before we actually went into knives that you should consult external sources as much as you can. And sometimes external sources are within the system. And then you can, and then we have here a question from Darcy saying that, how do you, and you can look at it, it's on the Slack channel, how do you address having internal sources to consult, but project leaders rely solely on usability studies on whether the end user wants and desires the feature being changed or introduced? So to put it sharply, you have additional information, but the project leaders are just going over usability studies to base all their assumptions in there. Problem is that when you brought up project leaders, it became a political question, okay? And you might have some places where internal politics are making a person with some authority say, I know what I'm doing, let me be, and please do what you're told. And I'm trying to put it simply in here. You need to be smart in those situations, okay? Sometimes you need to understand that if you want to change the behavior of people, it takes time to do it, and you're not here for the short run, but you're here for the longer run. So the first thing that I would do is very respectfully come to that person and say, I'm pretty sure that you're right, but we also have some additional information, and I think that it would be smart if only to consider it a little bit and to bring that in here. Even if we decide otherwise, it's good to have all that information in there. Now, what you're doing here, it's only making sure that that information is being aired, it's being known. Why? Because a couple of things might happen. It might happen that, you know what, that project leader was right, and we should have gone through usability studies, and maybe the customer support engineer who was saying that that feature should be like that has only the data points of the 2 customers who complain all the time, but 1,000 customers are not complaining because they like it, and they don't really hear that. So yeah, that person was right, and it's good that you brought that additional point, but the fact of the matter is that it's better to use usability studies. Or another thing might happen, and it is that in this case, we use those usability studies, but you release that feature into production, you understand that it's suboptimal, you fix it, solve it, modify it in order to be better fit what you wanted to do. And on the postmortem, you realize that it was more aligned with what that customer support or that internal source was saying that we need to do. And so you just gain legitimacy into using that information. And so when you do that postmortem, that retrospective, you say, well, we have better information. We should use it in addition to those customer studies. It's not, when you have a political battle, it's not a brute force battle that you want to do. You want to use a more intelligent approach in that, and you will need to play it slow. That's one option. Another option is to go to that person's head, but that will make it, again, it's a little bit of antagonism. I think that we need to try to say, let's include more information, even if we decide not to use it. But once you include it, when you do your retrospective, you will be able to point to, well, we knew that, or at least we had that information. We choose not to use it, so maybe next time we will use it better. Okay, so that is with regards to user stories. But back to preparations, and again, I'm seeing that time is running, so we need to move a little bit forwards. So whenever we're preparing for testing, we need to be prepared to different scenarios that we have in there. Okay, and we need to understand that, especially if the people who are going to be running the tests are not very experienced in testing, if you're developers or your customer support people, again, depending on your type of organization, then you will want to have things to help them along the way. One of the things that we're using in PractiTest, and I love it, it's something called cookbooks. And the concept of a cookbook, it's, I'm not really sure who brought it into the team, but it's great. It's a very synthesized and simple procedure. Just like when you have a recipe where it says, okay, start with those ingredients and then just mix them up, and it's kind of guiding you on the process. We have something like that. We started with having one testing cookbook because our developers do a lot of their testing. Oh, you need to go over the user story, and you need to make sure that you have the correct environment, and don't test in your environment, test in staging, and make sure that you have your data. It started with one, then we realized that we need another cookbook for integration testing, and then we need another cookbook for language testing. So we have a number of cookbooks depending on the type of testing you have. And it's kind of a pre-flight checklist that pilots need to do before they go. Remember when we used to fly? If you remember, whenever there's a flight, then you see that pilot or co-pilot going outside the plane just inspecting. It's part of their pre-flight checklist. They have a ton of things they need to do. Even if it's menial, even if we do it all the time, many times, we have that cookbook, that checklist. We make sure that we didn't forget one of the steps. And it's important, especially if we're doing repetitive tasks. Don't forget, and that's why we have those cookbooks. They're also pretty good because they're light, so they're not menacing. And programmers, customer support, they feel very comfortable working with that. Okay, and it's a live document, which means that we update it all the time. Another thing that is extremely important when you're talking about the testing process and things that needs to be ready is environments. If you want people to test the feature not in their environment, not in a vanilla environment, if you want them to use real data, it needs to be accessible. It needs to be there. They shouldn't invest right now 3 days just trying to figure out how to get the data. This is extremely important when you're talking about language testing. Do we have the environment that we need with the language? So we support Japanese. Do we have enough data in Japanese so that we can actually test it and see if it's working? Integrations, this is a big one. And oh, so we know that the system integrates, and you might just be checking those APIs, but maybe what broke is actually on the side of the integration. So if you're integrating with other places, make sure that you have those environments with the integrations set up. If you have setups or migrations, do you have those databases ready with how the system looks like right now? Now, the issue is that if you don't have it, it's only because you're lazy. Because today we have the ability to make all sorts of environments and just use Kubernetes for that. So if you want to have Docker stations for that or images for that, go ahead and do it. But it's really, really simple to do it. You just need to invest time in order to put it there. And then you will stop getting all those, oh, I wanted to test it, but I couldn't find that integration environment ready. So I just didn't do it. I'm going to sign it off as a risk and we'll test it in production. No, you shouldn't do that. Many times integration bugs are very, very hard to solve, and it takes time. Those are not the things that you want to leave for environment to test in production. Another thing that it's important is to realize, and here we go a little bit more into the Swiss Army knife. We will need different artifacts in order to run our test cases. Okay, just a second, coffee. If I'm going to be running a test, then a lot of times, let's say that we're working in a DevOps environment and I don't have a lot of time. So most of the functionality that I'm going to be testing right now is going to be as an exploratory testing charter. And extremely happy with that. I love exploratory testing. I will talk about keeping notes in a second. But in addition to what I just tested here, I need to test the regression around. So for that, it makes a lot more sense to have more scripted approaches to that. So it's important to make sure that you still have a regression test, a scripted regression test on your system. Your system might be very complex, so you want also to have like a large script based on areas and sanity or smoke scenarios to other areas, and you can decide, oh, this is very related to my functionality. I'm going to do a complete regression test, manual or automatic. I don't care. And on the other areas, I'm going to be using combinations of sanity and smoke testing. And again, sanity, it's basically on the level. Scripted is very thorough. Script is very thorough. Sanity might be a little bit deeper. Smoke is just like click on the module, and if you can load the module, it's good. If it breaks down, oh, you found the bug. So it depends on obviously on the depth and the risk that you think is going to be there. Again, it's not foolproof, but it's better than nothing. It's better than not even having that checklist. And I didn't remember that I have a functionality that is related to SSO that I need to check in here. So make sure that you have it in there. It's better than forgetting. Another way of another thing to understand, it's also that depending on who you are in the organization, sometimes you will want to work with scripts, sometimes you will prefer not to work with them. Concrete example, I know of a number of developers who hate scripted tests. If they see a format of step, action, expected result, they start scratching all over because, no, I'm not a tester. I shouldn't be doing testing because even if I need to do testing because we're doing whole team testing, I'm not going to be touching those kinds of tests because I'm a developer. And God forbid people see me running a scripted test. But if you give them a checklist, they look at it otherwise. Oh, remember to test this, test that. As a checklist, they can do it. Okay, don't tell them it's a script. But it's just a presentation area and it will help. Same goes for testing heuristics. Sometimes you have that information, but you want a heuristic of saying, okay, so after that, these are the whole areas that I want to go into that. I love heuristics. I love the heuristics from James Back. I love the heuristic of Elizabeth Hendrickson. I will actually add the links, I think, to the Slack channel. So take it from there. They're incredible. Now, there are additional things that you will also want to have handy. Cheat sheets. For me, there are also some pretty cool cheat sheets of data that you should have, like inputs and outputs to expect, special characters, everything that usually breaks the system. So I have cheat sheets for that as well. Canned data or customer anonymized data, obviously, it's important to have in there. It goes back to when we were talking about scenarios. If you're going to be testing, for example, attachments in the system, make sure that these are realistic attachments, both on the format as well as on the size, because those things matter. Then you want to have it in there. Scripts, again, if your system should be running, I don't know, something, a Perl script, or you can integrate with something like that, or you have an API in the system, so you don't want to test just the API call. You may want to have a more complex script, like your users actually work, and test with that more complex script in order to test that API calls that you have in the system. Because the interesting bugs are the bugs that are not related to one call, but are related to a series of calls that can intermingle together. So wait a second, this call is not working well with this call. Let's take a look into that. Okay, so those are the kind of things that you want to have. Okay, if you have good artifacts, if you have realistic data and stuff, it will make the results of your tests a lot better. Okay, and those are the kind of things that you need to prepare up front, because you cannot go ahead and do it every time. Okay. So moving forwards, we talk about that preparation. There's also the concept of the testing process. So let's see, wait a second, we have other people here. Just checking that there are no additional questions. Okay. Testing process, again, not rocket science here, but there is a process to it, and we need to make sure that people understand that enough. Okay? Right. There we go. If we don't prepare up front, you will when you get to the heat of the battle, then you will forget about some things that you wanted to do beforehand. So it's important. Also, we need to understand that many times you don't need to enter a battle in order to win the war. Sometimes you can just upfront understand what was the best things to do and communicate that before. But let's go into the actual points that I want to talk. I really recommend to make sure that your process includes some, I don't want to call them meetings, but let's say synchronization points, okay? The first one, and this is low-hanging fruit, but we just don't do it enough. I was talking about how complicated user stories actually are when you look at them, because there are too many assumptions. And even if you try to write down all of your assumptions in the user story, which you're obviously not going to do, there are things that you can do in order to avoid surprises further down the road. And the simplest one is something that we call a feature kickoff sync. I wish we do it internally for more features, but we do it only for the complicated ones. That's where we have people from product development and test. We sit together, and as simple as it sounds, we go over the user story. Because when you speak, you talk, you do more than what you write. So we go over the user story and we just explain. The person from product will explain what they want to see. The person from development will ask questions or maybe explain how he or she looks at it. And then the person from test will bring their inputs, okay? This is the lowest hanging fruit and the best way of avoiding bugs, because when you have 3 people coming together, and again, minimum of 3, but you can have 5, 7, whatever works for you, it will a lot better to go in there. You start, first of all, by understanding that, hey, oh, so this is what you wanted. Oh, cool, now I know. So I'm going to be able to work that way, both for the programmer who's doing the programming and the tester who's preparing for the test. A lot of times during these sessions, then either the programmer will bring all sorts of technological risks that are important. Maybe the feature is complex enough, so you're going to be bringing your security architect, and that person will want to bring up some points that are in there so that we don't run into security issues later on, or compliance issues if you want. But also, this is the place where testers can start saying, okay, so this is what I'm planning to do. And you go over strategies, and then the tester says, hey, you know what? I'm also going to be running some language checks on this. And then someone raises an eyebrow and says, oh, languages. Oh, right. So I'm going to write it down. I need to also add language support to that. Or did you notice that actually this will affect the integration of the system? So you're suppressing those bugs just by talking about it. Again, there's a saying in Spanish, and I'm not going to go into that. I told you that I'm Costa Rican, right? So there's a saying in Spanish there, if the war is known up front, then no, there shouldn't be any casualties. So if upfront I'm going to be telling you what I'm going to be testing, then you shouldn't write bugs into that, because you know that I'm going to be testing that. So make sure that you take that into account. So that is very important. And it's simple. It can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even if it takes half an hour. It's better than delaying the release for 1 day because I found a security bug that we didn't check for cross-site scripting. And it would have taken 5 minutes if we wrote it up front. So those are the kind of things that you want to get on your feature kickoff. Now, another thing that it's important, it's to have a culture of releasing mini releases internally into testing. There are a lot of, don't tell anyone, but there was a time in my life when I was a developer as well. I had to, they forced me basically to write HTML and CSS code for an application. And what happened was that it was an extremely teaching experience. I got to wear developer shoes for about a year. And I understood a lot of things that I didn't understand as a tester. One of them is that a developer looks at their work as art. And you don't like to be criticized when you do art because you put the best that you had in you. And so to you, it's perfect. I mean, I have 3 kids. I have 3 kids that are the most beautiful and perfect kids in the world to me. And when someone criticizes them, then I feel bad about it and I don't like it. So the same is the same for developers. So developers many times will not want to release half-baked features to testers because I know it's not ready. I know that we're lacking here, but because they're not releasing it to us, then they're not going to be able to get that early feedback that we could have been giving them all along. Oh, wait a second, you see this feature that you already did here? No, it's better if we do it that way. Make sure that you have a culture of mini releases. Sometimes it's by encapsulating data and even telling the tester, hey, go ahead and look only here. Don't go elsewhere because it's not ready, but give me feedback in there. Sometimes it's just by inviting the tester to sit on the developer's environment and just walking them through what you have in there. But make sure that you have mini releases. Don't wait. There's no real logic in waiting until the feature is ready, like completely ready, in order to release it to internal testing. Okay, yes, it will waste some more time for the tester, but it will save time for the feature being released. Also, another thing that it's important is even if you don't have many releases, or doesn't matter, you might have many releases, is to have periodic sync. Like you have your daily with your team. Daily is great because we can synchronize, but you don't go deep into anything. You might want to have those, if especially if your feature is going to be taking you, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks to develop. Make sure that you have either daily or twice a week sessions where you can sync with the developer and test. Okay, it might be similar to that exercise that I was saying in the mini release where you just go over the feature, but it's important to have it in there. Okay, so all of that is things that is in here. I see something in chat by Misma. Lowest hanging fruit is to discuss the feature with the relevant parties in the team. Oh, okay, cool. People think that what I'm saying it's important. Good, Misma. I like that. In any case, so go ahead and try to have those mini things. Don't assume. Again, a lot of times we assume that there's not a lot to know because everyone's thinking about the same things, and that's not the case. So once we have those processes in place, once we have those mini reminders that will help us to carry that, then we go into the actual testing operations. How do we test? And one of the things that we need to understand is that testing is an operation. I mean, it's a complex operation, and complex operations require mindsets, and complex operations require preparations, and complex preparations are flows that take all the places. And professional testing is a profession, and a professional testing operation it's a complex operation. Personally, I love to cook. Okay, you don't get to my size if you don't like cooking, and I'm not a chef. I never studied anything related to chefs, but when I'm cooking dinner for my family or my friends, I get into that mindset and I'm concentrated on what I'm doing. And I think that at least based on my knowledge and capabilities, for that 30 minutes or 2 hours, I'm becoming a professional chef in the sense that I'm concentrated on doing the right job. It's not like when you're in the middle of a session and you just want to make a sandwich, meaning, no, that's not cooking, that's making a sandwich. It's the same in testing. Sometimes you're getting deep into the testing, you're going deep into the features, you're uncovering that stuff. It's not that click, 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 yeah. It's not going to blow in the face of anyone. Even testing can be sandwich preparations or 5-course meal preparations, depending on the mindset. And so it's important to take that into account. When you're making a sandwich, you can go step by step. When you're cooking dinner, it's going to be a lot about going into it, actively thinking about that. You will be going back into testing. Let's leave cooking aside because I'm starting to get hungry. I think that it was Paul Gerard who said it yesterday. Every test is both scripted and exploratory. And I remember having this conversation with James Bach some years ago when James Bach, by the way, to me, he's the father of exploratory testing. Again, some people think about it, some people think it's different, but my conversation with him was going and realizing that even an exploratory test is scripted. because you have the charter, because you do have that script in your mind even of what you want to do. And the exploration is what happens on the side. So the same goes for every testing. Unless you're an automation program, even when you're clicking, 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 you're still exploring what's happening on the sides. Okay, it's there. And a very important part about testing, especially for some kinds of testers, um, more of the introvert sides, we think that testing is just running our tests and reporting our bugs, but it's a lot more about communication than we give it credit for. First thing first, as I said, when you're testing, you need to go into your zone. Okay, it's not something that you can do on an off note. It's not something that you can do while doing other things. I wrote a couple of blog articles on that on my blog, explaining how I go into my zone. You see these headphones? They're actually broken because I use them quite a lot. You're not seeing it, but I have a lava lamp in here. Or one of the things that people don't realize is, okay, so I have ADD, which means that for me it's very hard to concentrate. But there are incredible small things. You know what? You see this? This is a candle, and no one actually sees it, never, but having a flickering candle next to my computer allows my strangely wired machine always to see something on the side, and on a weird sense, it helps me to concentrate. It's like when you have music playing and it helps you to concentrate because it activates all sorts of things that will allow you to concentrate on that. And for every person, it's different. For some people, it's brown music, brown noise. For some people, it's heavy metal. I love heavy metal. For some people, is meditating before their sessions, and everything's okay. For some people, it's dimming out the lights or closing out the door. You need to know how you go into your zone, and you're able to work deeply on the things that you're going to be doing. You need to have privacy. I hate open spaces. I hate them. I remember working in a company where we had open spaces. I used to book conference rooms for myself in order to go and have deep testing sessions. Working from home, it's worse. Guys, I have 3 kids, 1 dog, 1 hamster, cats on the side, fish, and there's always laundry. And whenever you start doing something, something will come and take you out. So my kids know the door is closed. Please don't, unless someone is bleeding, don't come and bother me. Okay? So you need that privacy, and you need to define your self-testing sessions. Define to yourself that you're going to be testing right now for the next 45 minutes, for the next hour. I don't know, as much as you can allow yourself or you want to. And during that session, concentrate. Okay? Concentrate as much as you can. If you're not in your testing zone, chances are you're going to be missing the interesting things. Only things that jump to you, you will be able to catch. Another thing that it's important once you're doing testing is to realize that not all the areas were created equal. And it's extremely important to prioritize your testing before you test. So I mentioned that I have scripted tests and checklists. Problem with checklists and scripted tests is that they're not prioritized. Usually you do them based on one order of appearance, like module, 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 based on the sequence of operations. But maybe, just maybe, you're right now testing a specific feature, and the higher risk area, it's on the 3rd point that you would be testing, and it will take you about, I don't know, 30 minutes to get to that. Wait, if this is the most important area, if this is the highest risk area, if this is the area that people want to have that feedback, I'm going to jump here, start here, find the bugs here, and then go back and maybe run the complete testing. Why? Because maybe you have so much stuff in here that it will take all your time, and time wasted elsewhere, it's time wasted. So start there. It's really, really important. Prioritize your tests, meaning you're not building a house. You don't need to have the walls in order to put the electricity in. You can start with the electricity, believe me, not in the house, in the testing. And another thing that it's also important is, as much as I was saying that you need to have your privacy and concentration and stuff, don't wait until you're done in order to communicate. You found a critical bug. Okay, it's critical enough so that you want to tell someone right now because they need to start working. Maybe it will render the whole test. Maybe you will tell your developer, hey, I found this bug, and he'll say, oh, Stop what you're doing. The fix is so big that anything else that you test right now is not gonna be relevant. So if you have big news, don't wait, okay? You don't need to wrap it up beautifully. You can report the bug later, open Slack, pick up the phone, call someone, whatever. Make sure that you communicate everything that you can whenever it makes sense to communicate. Again, I found a very small bug. I'm not gonna be, you missed a period on this sentence. That can wait for later, okay? But just make sure that you understand how you're doing it. It shouldn't be an autopilot. Note taking. I think that my single most important tool in the world whenever I'm testing, it's my notebook. And if you don't believe me, here's my notebook. I always have a notebook and a pen next to me. Why? Because I always have ideas and I always write things down. And even if I'm using PractiTest to run my tests and I have a good script in there and I can modify everything, there's some things that are not worth going into practice and I just write them down. For example, okay, so if I have everything that I tested in there, it's going to be there. If it's an exploratory test, I will put in my exploratory test. But it's minor things that I'm putting there. I might actually write it down in a notebook. If you have an application, put it there. But if not, just write it down. A lot of times I get ideas for other tests that I need to run. Wait a second. So I'm right now running an integration test, but I just realized that languages might be an issue. Don't trust yourself or your memory. Write it down. I need to go ahead and test languages later on. Things that I found in the context. If you're using a system like PractiTest or any other system, and I don't care. If you're recording everything with a camera, that's great because you're going to be reporting the bug, but you also recorded the context. This is what I did. This is the database I was working with. This is the process that I was following. This is the integration environment that I was using, because I'm not going to be telling you anything new by saying that sometimes your bugs are not going to be able to be reproduced. So if you're able to give context, it will help quite a lot. Many times what I have when I'm testing something, it's not a bug, but an idea to improve something. Where do you report it? I write it down. Limitations found. We need to put it on the documentation, in the to-do notes, in the, I don't know, known limitations, put it there. Same goes with risks and questions. Write everything down, because if you're anything like me, you think that it's important enough that you will remember, but then the world takes over and you forget, okay? And you get those duh moments because you remember that there was something important, you just cannot put your finger into exactly what it was. So it's simple and you can do it. And you know what? If you need a PractiTest notebook, these are pretty cool. They say PractiTest in here. Send me your address and I'll make sure that we send you one. Okay, on me with a sticker. Notebooks are important. Another thing of the operations that we don't do enough is the test team update meetings. So here's the story. We used to have, I wear a number of hats in PractiTest. One of them is support, and we have this pretty cool support meeting weekly where all the support engineers just sit down and they go over, they can tag the different support tickets and they bring it up and we talk about them as a learning experience. Oh, this is the question that I had. It took me a while to review it. And this is what I found, or these questions are coming from multiple customers. I think it makes sense that we go over there. And I started seeing a lot of value in those support meetings. And I understood that we need to do something similar in testing, where we have regular meetings where we go over interesting tests that we're running, interesting findings, because many times we talk one to the other, but we don't communicate it to the rest of the team, so it's important. Help needed. If I'm stuck on something and I need someone who's better at running SQL queries or doing data analysis than me, go ahead and do it. If you have non-reproducible bugs and you just need it, help with that. Again, if it's important enough, obviously you will stop what you're doing and look for help. Sometimes it's not. And you do want to bring, hey, I've been breaking my head up on this bug, I cannot reproduce it. I'll be happy if anyone has ideas, obviously questions or ideas for new artifacts. I think that we should improve this test with that or create a new cookbook in there. These are nice meetings. They can be, I schedule it for an hour a week. Usually takes between 20 minutes and half an hour. And it's great. It gives a lot of camaraderie and it helps everyone to work in there. And even if you have 2 testers and 5 programmers that do testing, invite everyone to the meeting. It can be good enough, and if there's enough value on them, then even your programmers will be happy to attend. And if you don't have enough meat for it to do it on a weekly basis, do it every second week. But have those meetings. Those are great places to have feedback and bring things up. Okay, the last part is, if you remember my schematics when we started, is what happens after we deploy it. So remember when a lot of people started talking about testing in production? I remember testing in production, when I heard that term the first time, I thought that means that so we're going to be releasing the product and then we run the same sanity test in production. Okay, yes, we do that, but that's not what we meant. The idea of testing in production is to understand that we're limited to the amount of time that we have to test in pre-production. So we need to be very picky on what's high risk enough, what has the possibility of coming with data loss. If you have something a bug that can bring data loss, you don't want to test that in production, test it pre-production. But if you have bugs that might be on Firefox when running on Linux, then this pixel might be like that you leave for production. You need to be choosing, you need to understand what's going to be there. But once it hits production, you need to test it. It's not like you're going to be forgetting about it and waiting for customer support to say, hey, we found the bug for you. No, it's not like that. You need to be a lot more proactive. Whenever you're releasing something, whenever there's a space launch, then you have mission control doing a lot of monitoring in that. If you have aircraft actually in the air, you will have the control tower taking care of that. Even if you have traffic light operations on a complex city, you have a control room for that. Complex operations have control rooms. Your system requires a control room, or at least control over what's going in there. So let's talk a little bit about that. 90% of your tests today are going to be running production. Even if I'm not right, even if it's not 90%, let's say that you do a lot of internal testing, unless you're working on healthcare-related system or safety systems, then at least 70, if not 80%, if not 95% of your testing is going to be running production. And by that, I mean that the coverage of 90% of the stuff that might happen will happen only in production, because you simply don't have time or resources to do it pre-production. Having said that, interesting fact is that most issues, just like in flights, they happen during takeoff or landing. Those are the critical operations. So it's not like on a regular Tuesday, no one did anything and the system went down. Usually it's when you're deploying something, or just after you made a change that something happened, or just after something was modified that something will happen. Okay, so those are, whenever you're doing changes, that's where you need to be more attentive to what you're doing. And so you have an active duty to be, you have a duty to be active during deployments, okay? And make sure that you continue working all the time. How does that translate? First of all, even before we deploy, we need to treat deployment just like we would treat a user story. And you remember that we talked about that when you review a user story, you look for risks and you look for what you want to test, and you have a plan for that. So I think that we need to approach deployments just like that, okay? As part of the user story, maybe you don't do it during the user story because there are a lot of technical things that will only happen during the time that you're writing the code. But when you start planning your deployment, then you have a lot of things that you can go into it. So things, for example, about risks. Okay, so this deployment, what might happen? There might be downtime because we're going to be having database migration. Okay, it's not necessarily that we will have downtime, but that's a risk. We're modifying the APIs that work on the integration. Okay, that's a risk. depending on the type of risks, then you will know when you want to schedule that, or at least bring that in order to be a consideration. We need to be, I'm talking here about rollback options. We need to be the pessimists in the room. Not every time, meaning sometimes we are over optimistic as a team. There still needs to be a devil's advocate. Okay, so we're assuming that everything will go right. If something goes wrong, what are our rollback options? Sometimes the rollback is very simple. Just deploy the executable or the script, and everything will be okay. It takes a second. But if you have data migration, then can you restore the data, meaning with a script? Or do you need to do bring up a backup? If you need to bring up a backup, how much time would it take? Oh, so our rollback option would take basically 2 minutes of off time. When can we put it in there? All the deployment process, stuff like that, you need to test it, okay? Even the rollback, you need to test it. If it's an important release, go ahead and test the rollback as well. When do you schedule it? Make sure that, and here we're going to operation considerations and SLAs and stuff like that. You're not exempt from thinking about that. You are working on a DevOps team, which means that you are responsible for the system in production, so you're responsible for the SLA. When can you schedule it based on your SLA? Maybe you have windows when you can have that downtime and you need to put it in there. Maybe you need to notify, so put it in there. And make sure that we have enough documentations, maybe in-app explanations. A lot of times we release a feature and surprised our users. So we modified the UI for you, and we didn't tell you because we're so cool that we don't need to do that. But maybe you can put an in-app explanation for that and help your users. Users are not like kids with puppies. They don't like surprises. They like to know what's going on and to feel in control. Okay. After all, they're paying you for what you're doing. So give them that control. You need to test during the deployment. You remember that I said that whenever someone told me the testing in production, I thought it was testing after production. So this is that part. So don't leave it to chance. So you deploy the system, test it. Okay, if you have automation, run it. If you need a sanity or a smoke test, run it manually. Just make sure that you're running something, because you do want to have that in there. And then we go into monitoring. There is something that now we call it the 530 rule, but it used to be 1-530. The first minute, everyone's like this. Oh God, just don't let it fall, don't let it fall, don't let it fall. After the first minute, if there are no exceptions, if the servers are still up, you start breathing again, take a sip of coffee, all good. But there's going to be the critical first 5 minutes, especially if you're during the time that there's enough traffic, then you can do it. And then during those first 30 minutes, everyone is still on call and on duty. Because as I said, most things will happen during takeoff or landing. And so if anything big is going to happen, you want to have everyone involved in the room during those first 30 minutes. Obviously, very attentive during those 5 minutes, but involved during those 30 minutes. It shouldn't be the case that you deploy and run for lunch. No. You stay there because there might be exceptions that you need to handle. There might be rollback. You will want to be very keen on exceptions and telemetry. So if you have a monitoring system, go ahead into telemetry right there. If you only have exceptions, go ahead into your exceptions log all the time. But make sure that during those first minute, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, you're going to be very keen on that. And don't let anyone leave, meaning it doesn't make sense that, oh, Jack, I know that you're in lunch, but you remember that release that we did 10 minutes ago? It's crashing. No, Jack should be here, okay? He shouldn't go to lunch during the first 30 minutes after release. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, health dashboards are what happens after those 30 minutes. Monitor, have telemetry. Make sure that you have everything that you need in order to ensure that everything's working together. There are quite a lot of systems in there. If you don't have systems, it's just as simple as going over the actions of your application. Make sure that you have a way of aggregating data. I know that I expect account X to do 550, between, let's say, 400 and 600 clicks on this module on a daily basis. Or they're still doing it. Maybe you have it on an aggregated basis for the amount of users. Whenever you release something that has a detrimental effect on your application, usually clicks start going down. Okay, just as if you're measuring time, it takes longer to do operations. Make sure that you have those health dashboards. You will be able to see, even if the change is subtle, but it's a detrimental change. Just as we talked about the feature value hypothesis that is coming up next, you can also see if you have a detrimental effect on the system, and you can see it even if it's a slow dripping that it's making issues with that. Again, when we talk about the feature value hypothesis analysis, it's now. And just to roll back to what we were talking about, whenever we release a new feature, we assume that we're doing it because something will improve. It might be because you will have more clicks on an application. It might be because the bottom line, you're going to be selling more stuff. It might be something as menial as people should like my phone app better and will give me better reviews on the Apple Store, or what's the one for Google? Oh, God. Well, the Google one. Android something. And just make sure that you check the reviews in there. But have that value hypothesis analysis and do it in there. And again, make sure that you have access to logs and alerts whenever you have a lot of exceptions. Now, I'm sorry to break the news to you, but if you're working on a SaaS system, there are always exceptions. And half of them, maybe 75% of them, you don't really care about them that much if they happen once. But if you start seeing exception clustering, then you will be able to see it. And most systems out there will give you that clustering ability. So, oh, if it's happening once every 3 days, we don't care. If it's happening 5,000 times a day, oh, we do care about that. And we wanted to care about that when it was 500 times an hour, okay, instead of that. And that's about it with the small things that we can do today. But I think that most importantly, we need to remember that you need to work with your team, because at the end of the day, you need to improve the things that make sense to you. You need to improve the things that will have a lasting effect and will bring you value to what you're doing. Monitor the stuff that you need to do. Okay, don't think that the list that I gave you is the list you should do. Just think about your own improvements, or even within the list that I'm giving you, try to think which ones are the ones that you need to do. There's no best practice, not even for me, meaning all the time we check what we're doing, and stuff that used to be good yesterday, it's not going to be good tomorrow. So it's perfectly okay to modify everything that you're doing and try to share your experience and learn from others, internally as well as externally. Coming to sessions like the online test conf, or reading blogs, or listening to podcasts, sharing your own stuff. If you have things to say, tell them out loud. It's not, meaning I meet some testers who say, well, I'm not going to be opening up a blog right now because blogs are passe, and I don't want to do a podcast. Blogs are not passe. You can still write stuff. I love reading stuff. I hate seeing stuff. So for me, it's better on a reading area than anything like that. So just share from your experience. And it's always important to work based on team atmosphere. Try to understand, if you're making a change, how is that affecting the rest of your team, to make sure that you're not doing something that will mark you down as someone that people don't want to work with you, especially when you're improving things. Try not to step on anyone's toes, because people don't like it on a general basis. What is this? Oh, I have a, oh, sorry, this is, don't use that bit.ly workshop. I'm going to be taking this off. But you can still contact me. If you have any questions, please. First of all, thanks for sticking up with me during this last almost hour and a half. Hopefully, the points that I brought up are good enough. I will be sharing this presentation a little bit later. I need to correct a couple of things. The mind map, I need to put the updated one. But then I will be sharing it with you. And again, if there's anything that you want to share with us, with me, please go ahead and do it. I'm going to be taking a short break right now to prepare for the online test conf that is starting in 35 minutes. But if you have any questions just during the day, go ahead and just shoot them to me using Slack. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that you will be able to stick around for the next sessions that we have starting in 35 minutes. There's a great session by Mary Chard that is starting. Then we have a bunch of additional sessions during the day. And again, thanks for your time, and hopefully it was useful for you.